Kim and Jeff and everybody else that's been putting this Superpod on. It's really nice to A, be having Superpod again, and B, being together in person and not trying to do something this amazing. Can you step that way? In person. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'd like to introduce my research assistant, Aisha Rashid. She was a former student of mine here on San Juan Island in 2020, along with, there's another former student, Sophia, back there. She's working for the Sound Watch Voter Education Program. So really happy to be here. We won't take too long. I'm assuming there'll be some questions, and I hope, I'm loving this young person's involvement, and so folks feel free to ask Aisha any questions that you might have as well. Actually, can you stand over there and do the, because I don't have the advancer deal. I'll take her. Come here. So this is Iba. She's a rescue dog found on the streets of Sacramento, and we can talk more about that after the presentation. So this is just kind of a little overview of our my talk here. So the Whale Scout Project used to be called the Whale Scout Project. It was a program of the University of Washington under Dr. Sam Wasser, and Wild Orca, my nonprofit, took it over at the beginning of 2022 with prep in starting really in about 2019. So we rebranded the program to be called the Southern Resident Killer Whale Health Monitoring Program, because we do more than just collect poop. That is the main thing, but there are a lot of other aspects to it, so we'll cover that too. You can skip past that. I don't know why he put that in there. I am Dr. Giles, just Giles, if you're talking with me, and I'm the Science and Research Director for the nonprofit. So our mission is a lofty one, but I think it's still an attainable one, which is to save the southern resident killer whales from extinction. And we do this in a three-pronged approach. So a lot of research is done a bit in isolation, not so much on southern resident killer whales, but biological studies are often really just done for the sake of the question that's being asked, not for the recovery of a population. And so everything that we do is driven by the philosophies of really the discipline of conservation biology. And so we embody that by doing all of the aspects that you see here. So our three-pronged approach includes our conservation research, which I'll cover mostly today, and then our strategic advocacy, where we translate science into manageable language that anybody can understand, and then we take that and provide opportunities for the public to get engaged through our action guide and through participation in other events that we're doing and participating in, collaborating with, to be really activists yourself to get involved, because it will take all of us. And lastly, our policy engagement. So as a conservation biologist, one of the tenets of this discipline is to make sure that your science is put into the hands of policymakers. So it's not just doing science for science sake, but really making sure that the policymakers are aware of what's happening and have a good idea of how to implement your research in order to recover the species that you're studying. Again, conservation biology is a crisis-oriented discipline, and that means that we just don't have time to do science and hope that policymakers will find it. So we actively, a fair amount of my time is spent actually having meetings with legislative officials or their aides, having them come out with us on the boat. That's not, we're going to be doing more and more of that, just to be able to have that time on the water with them, or in the office, or just sitting near the water to talk about these issues, instead of a 30-minute Zoom, which is so common. So everybody here probably knows who the Southern residents are, but I would be remiss if I just didn't have a couple little slides. So these, this slide is reflecting the 2 new babies in L-pod, and these circles represent essentially the size of the different pods relative to one another. they're an incredibly unique, interesting, vital part of the ecosystems in which they occur. I often refer to them as an ancient tribe of beings that co-evolved with Pacific salmon. And they are, again, integral to the fabric of what we see and why we love the Pacific Northwest so much. And one thing, we Washingtonians like to say the Southern residents are, Washington's whales. First off, they're nobody's whales. They're their own whales. But when we go along with this philosophy of being Washington's whales, if we just look at it from a geographic perspective, they are actually far-ranging animals going all the way to Monterey and all the way north up to Haida Gwaii and occasionally at least up to Southeast Alaska. So the effort, one of Wild Orca's efforts, newest efforts that we've really been embarking on is to make inroads into Oregon and Washington, Oregon and California, to get people engaged in those states, to take responsibility and interest and actions in their states to try and increase the information that people have about these whales, and again, providing opportunities for action and being a part of the solution here. So very briefly, the threats: lack of prey, lack of quality and quantity prey, mostly Chinook salmon, but also coho chum and some other minimal amounts of other species. But just generally speaking, they're not getting enough to eat. Toxicants in the environment, these are man-made toxicants. So they're prevalent in the whales, in the food web, and when they're not getting enough to eat, they're metabolizing those fat stores, which causes a whole host of kind of cascading negative impacts for the whales. And then acoustic effects. We have a lot of large ships going through this region. It's just increasing with the authorization of more port activity. What we say when we're on the water is if you see a large ship, a ocean-going ship on the horizon, it's potentially loud enough to mask the whale's ability to locate their food through echolocation. And there's a lot of traffic in the region. But we know, and we'll talk about our findings later, but we do know that at least small vessels in the vicinity of whales have a significantly less impact on these whales when they're getting enough to eat. So by far, the biggest problem is the fish issue, the lack of fish. And honestly, to go into a talk about what we need to do about that, we'd need a whole Superpod, but happy to answer questions about that. We do have some really good ideas about what to do. We have our Fair Fisheries campaign, which is asking that the whales be considered a major stakeholder in fisheries management decisions, which they are not right now. And anyway, we can talk more about that. So this is a graphic that my director, Michael, just put together today. It's from the Pacific Salmon Commission, and this is showing the decline in Chinook salmon just in the Salish Sea. So again, this is not the entire range of the southern residents, but essentially this trend is what you would find throughout the southern residents range. And it's not just the quantity, but it's the quality of the fish. So fish used to be big. They used to be really big. People often ask, how can you have this massive bodied apex predator, long-lived animal that only eats fish? This is an example of how you could have that. Fish used to be massive. Fish coming out of the Snake River, which is just another reason why we need to breach those dams and open up that hundreds and hundreds of miles of spawning habitat, high elevation, cold water habitat that's available beyond those dams. For fish like this, these are spring run Chinook salmon. If you haven't had an opportunity to see the film The Lost Salmon by Shane Anderson, I strongly encourage you to do that. It's available on PBS right now. And it's an amazing film because he documents the fact that scientists at UC Davis were able to isolate this spring gene in salmon. And so this is a direct, very clear way of us being able to monitor runs of salmon and really pinpoint and target different rivers that still host salmon with this spring gene, because it's the spring gene that allows them to get this big. or bigger, actually. And now I like throwing out this question. Anybody that's heard me ask it before, don't answer it. Just for the heck of it, does anybody want to venture a guess about, so this fish here is probably close to 100 pounds. Fish coming out of the Snake River were, the spring run Chinook salmon would have been over 120 pounds. So massive, massive animals. So for a killer whale that has to eat somewhere between 300 and 400 plus pounds of food per day per whale, they'd have to find 3 or 4 of these. Now, just Washington State, anybody want to venture a guess of what the average size Chinook salmon, which are the fattiest, most lipid-rich Chinook are, the salmon are? How much is the average poundage? 30, 40, 50? 15? 12 and a half. 12 and a half pounds. That's the average size of a Chinook salmon now in Washington State. And so imagine these massive whales that have to find 300 pounds of food per day per whale. Think about how much they have to forage for these puny, puny fish by comparison for what they used to have. And so we're seeing this. We're seeing this on the water with a massive change in the behavioral budget over time of how much time the whales are spending of a day during daylight hours. How much time are they spending foraging? How much time are they spending resting or socializing or traveling? And we have a significant decline in resting. This is a paper I'm working on right now. Resting behavior back when the first studies were coming out in the 80s, early 80s. The whales were resting 25 to 27% of the time during daylight hours. 10 years after that, 99, with Rich Osborne's dissertation, the whales were resting 13% of the time. My research that was published in 2007 and 2014 in my master's and then dissertation, PhD dissertation, showed the whales resting only 6.9% of the time during daylight hours. And the difference in that behavioral budget is being made up in foraging behavior, which makes sense when you realize how small the fish are and how much they have to forage to find these fewer fish. And when you think about these animals that are culturally bonded, incredibly culturally bonded, and one of the amazing things that we see with them is them sharing food, literally catching a fish, biting it in half and letting a conspecific or a family member catch the rest of it. The Center for Whale Research has phenomenal drone video of this. If you have a chance to make it to their store, try and see that, or ask Katie to put it up on the film, because it not only shows the effort that these whales have to take to catch the fish, but it's so tiny, and yet they're still sharing. They're still sharing that fish. And so it hits me right in my heart to think about the change over time that these whales have experienced. These are whales that co-evolved with massive Chinook salmon, both in quantity and quality over hundreds of thousands of years. And in a mere 150 years, we have completely decimated their way of life, completely decimated their prey base. And so they're hanging on. So we have to hang on. We have to keep pushing to change the trajectory of this population. And the way that we're approaching this is by looking at their feces, so studying what's coming out of them to understand what's happening on the inside. So this is our amazing new research boat, which I love. And there's Eva on the bow, and my research associate and husband, Jim, who I conscripted during COVID to come on board and work with us because we couldn't have anybody else on the boat because of UW restrictions for space. So Jim came on board in 2020, and we just get to see so much amazing things out there that I hope to keep him forevermore. But that's him behind the wheel there. So this is an illustration of how we conceptualize our work and how we conceptualize our ability to be as effective as possible. So we call it our detection to protection. And there's a paper out there on our table if you want to grab one. But essentially, we stay far away from the whales. We're able to do our work because of using EBA's superpowers, being able to smell scat samples up to a mile away, we can do this sampling. We collect it off the water, we process it and send it to our labs where they analyze it for hormones, toxicants. We'll go over everything else. We put out those, so one of the very great things about taking the program from the university and putting it under the umbrella of a nonprofit is our catchphrase is moving from an academic time pace to an actionable time pace. So what I mean by that is when you're dealing with a university, it's often affiliated with a grad student. And poor things, I blocked that whole part of my life just to not even remember it happened. But there's a lot of things happening when you're a grad student. It's not just being able to analyze data and publish papers, which is what we researchers and what you public want, is the data to be analyzed and the findings to be published, and then to put them in the hands of policymakers. But at the academic level, it can take 6, 7, 8 years before the samples get analyzed and written up. Now we're about 2 weeks away from the last of our hormone data. So all of our scat samples have been analyzed from last year already. Going forward, our plan is to analyze them on a quarterly basis so that we're putting this information, maybe not in the form of a peer-reviewed journal article, but certainly in a white paper on our webpage so we can see what's happening more real time and make that available every time we have a meeting with elected officials. So. Yeah, thank you. I'm really, really happy about that. So again, we put the information out to the public, give them action alerts where you can get involved, and then really putting this information at the highest levels possible to affect change. So this is a beautiful scat sample. If you've never seen beautiful whale poop, this is what it looks like. This was last year. This is a screen grab from a video we got. We often get not even a quarter of that. That's all they're pooping out sometimes, is just a tiny little bit. Sometimes EBA, thanks to EBA, we can find it. Sometimes what we collect is so tiny it barely registers in the 50 ml tube that we store it in. We might get 0.5 mils. We might get 1 mil or 3 mils. If we get 3 mils, we can do most of the analysis that we want to do. Certainly the hormone data, we can analyze that. That's not nearly big enough to do the persistent organic pollutant research that we want. We need about 15 mils to get that. And it's not that common where the whales are pooping out enough fatty samples that we're able to collect that. But we're trying. And so these are all the things that we're looking at, being able to analyze from just one big scat sample like that. Things like microplastics, the gut microbiome. We know now more and more about the importance of having a healthy gut. These whales don't have healthy guts. I can tell you that right now. They need more food. If they had more food, the toxicants would be staying locked up in their blubber and it wouldn't be coming out in their poop. So many things, and happy to answer questions about that as we go along. So our findings, we're going to be going back with our new findings for the last 10 years of information, well, 8 years of fecal collection, and redo a lot of the analysis that has come out since 2012 from our research. But in a nutshell, what we're finding is that there's high levels of pregnancy loss. 70%, almost 70% of the females in this population are losing their calves in utero. They're dying in utero and then they're miscarried, or the babies are born and die right away, like we saw with J35's baby. When we are seeing, and those females, by the way, that are losing their calves are also showing lack of nutrition hormones. So they're not getting enough to eat, so the body's natural response to that is to miscarry. Amplification of toxicants, again, if they're not getting enough to eat, those toxicants are coming out in the feces, and we see that. Increased stress levels, and obviously early death and disease. We're losing these males right when they're coming into their breeding age, and we're losing reproductive age females, which we shouldn't be, because if they're giving birth, they're offloading their toxicants, and yet we're losing the breeding age females as well. I threw this in after two comments from two different presentations today. This is the southern residents playing with porpoise to death. There's a paper coming out, it's in final review right now, called Focinicide, and this has been documented since the study started in 1976 with the whales, these southern resident fish-eating killer whales, the gentle giants of the ecotypes of this area, finding and killing porpoise. We have over 80 instances of this occurring. It's fascinating. It's really curious as to why they do this. The picture that we saw very first thing in the morning with the mola mola in between three killer whales, that's exactly the behavior that we see these whales, or the whales will get together and carry the porpoise around on their pec fins. It's just a really bizarre behavior. I'll just cut to the chase. We didn't answer the question as to why in our paper. We posed some possible hypotheses about why this is, but really curious and happy to answer about that too if anybody is interested. So again, this is really the philosophy of conservation biology at its core, that species have intrinsic value separate from what humans can gain from them. This is not about being an extractive resource, a natural resource that humans can benefit from, but rather a deep, deep belief that species have intrinsic value all onto their own. And when you talk about a population, a tribe like the southern residents, and think back over the millennia and how long they've been here and how they have helped craft what we see and what we love here. This really, again, this is kind of our Wild Orca's guiding principle. wildorca.org/act if you want to become involved. I hope you become involved. I've absolutely loved the reminder to everybody to make your calls, this is kind of a little slideshow of our website to give you an idea of how it works. We give you ideas, wow, it's going super fast, ideas about things to say about the different issues. We give you information about who to call or where to write. We try and make it as easy as possible for people to get engaged and stay engaged. And so back to my comment about making it a weekly thing or a bi-weekly or everyday thing about calling about the dams, it does matter. It's really hard to think that we as individuals can bring about change, but we can. And we do know that when elected officials hear from us, they have to. They're legally bound to document your response to them, your call to them, or your letter to them. And handwritten letters are basically like 10 times more important than just signing a petition. And so it's really important to take the time making the call, or better yet, write a letter. Write a couple of them when you're sitting there watching something else, and just mail them out a couple times a month. Really, really important actions that each one of us can take about many, many issues. I think that's it. Anybody have any questions? Mm-hmm.
So I had read something about using ocean sun scat to determine or to verify her DNA against Tokitae's, that she is in fact her mother. Has that been done?
It hasn't been done, but we have been contacted by the independent veterinarians that are caring for Toki, or at least reporting on her health. And that is the plan going forward. My lab will do the analysis on a regular basis to track her health. As far as the DNA to compare, that has not been done because so far we haven't actually gotten any feces. Howie and others over the years have requested fecal samples to do analysis on, but that hasn't happened to date. The new people in charge of that facility, I believe that they're ready to do it. It just hasn't happened yet. I hope that they're ready to do it. Or we wouldn't have been contacted. Like specifics. What does it take? How much do you need? How do you do it? How much does it need to be frozen? How fast do we need to ship it? all of that. They've asked for particulars about that, and we've provided that in the form of a white paper. So they're ready to roll. We just need to, I guess maybe we need to push them. I don't know, we'll talk to Charles or Lori about that later. Mm-hmm.
The fecal samples that you collect are surface. What do you know about the sinking stuff?
Really interesting question. Jeff and I just had a conversation about this. It is curious to wonder whether or not what sinks is different from what floats. I don't like to think about the ones that sink. It really actually hurts my heart when I see them so far down and we can't get them. When they are sinking, we do have a pool net that we can use to try and get down into the water column and pull them back up, as opposed to our scoop that we use for the surface collection. It probably says something different about their health if it's sinking. I can definitely tell you that when the whales are not getting enough to eat, we are seeing watery diffuse feces, essentially diarrhea in the water. And we have been working with folks that do drone surveys where they can see them pooping, but they're like, oh gosh, it's already gone. Like, oh, so-and-so, we'll get a call from Michael at the center or John Durbin from SR3. Oh, there's a whale pooping over here. Never mind. And it's just gone that fast. And so to me, one of our new analyses that I want to do, we needed to get the rest of it established with our new lab. But one of the analysis I want to do, and we have to do this before it gets lyophilized or basically freeze-dried, is test for lipid content. I believe that when they're getting enough to eat, the feces are very fatty rich. They're able to let go some of the fat. They don't have to metabolize all of the energy that they're eating, and that's when we see floaters. What's sinking? Again, like out of sight, out of mind, I guess. On a different note, but related note, Biggs killer whale feces, we have attempted to get Biggs killer whale feces over the years, not very much because we have zero funding for it, which we're hoping to change going forward. But EBA has found 2 Biggs killer whale feces. They're, one of them was, I called it a hair vortex because it was kind of like in the water. It looked like this like 3-pronged stick. But she was really hitting on it, so I was like, okay, I'll scoop it. And as soon as I scooped it out of the water in our 1,000 ml beaker, you could see that it was a feces, and it was basically mostly hair, probably seal hair because it was short, bound together by some mucus. I think that, and then our colleagues at NOAA, who have also been trying to collect Biggs killer whale feces over the years, Brad Hansen says that it took him 80 hours right behind the whales. They do the fecal collection in a different way. They do what's called fluke follows, so they're very close behind the whales. 80 hours. So those whales were, I think that, well, just for the heck of it, and the teacher in me is coming out, why do you guys think we're not finding Biggs killer whale species? Sophia? Well, that's my hypothesis, that they might be pooping at depth so that their prey can't see it or maybe smell it if it's at the surface. Just like Biggs killer whales are not chatty like the fish eaters are, they pretty much vocalize mostly after a kill because their prey has ears. It might be that they're pooping at depth to avoid detection, poop detection by their prey. Any other hypotheses out there? I agree. We don't know, but we'll continue to look for it because it sure would be neat to do some comparison analysis between the 2 populations, knowing that the Biggs killer whales are more toxic, have more toxicants locked up in their fat stores, and yet they're increasing at an exponential rate. I mean, just not exponential, but an amazing rate. Females that are giving birth every 2 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff. Yeah, 2 to 3. We used to say a healthy birth interval was 3 to 5. There are Biggs killer whales that are having babies that are being born and living much more frequently than that, and yet they're in the same noisy water. They're around boats of all kinds. They're but the difference is that their prey is abundant. Ariel?
How did you get involved with your research?
Oh boy. Come here. They're talking about you. Oh my goodness. So Eva was found by my sister in Sacramento wandering the streets when she was about 5.5 months old. Prior to that, she had been abandoned on the Sacramento Animal Shelter's doorstep when she was 5.5 pounds. Cold, wet, and lethargic is what her intake paperwork said. Isn't it like she knows I'm talking about her? So she was nursed back to health by the animal shelter, given away to a foster home, and then was an escape artist out of that woman's yard. And so when my sister found her wandering the streets of South Sacramento, which is not a great area, she took her, she noticed the tattoo on the belly, so knew that she had been spayed, took her to the animal shelter, got her scanned, and realized that that's where she came from. And then my sister had her for about 2 years, and then her other dog, Loki, lived up to her name and started bullying this dog, who at the time was named Binky. And so my sister was asking me to adopt her, and Jim and I were never going to be dog people again after the loss of our dog, China, who lived to be 14 and a half. But then I met Eva. So the rest is history. Well, I guess it's not. I had her for a year. Then she met Heath Smith, who was the main dog trainer for the conservation canines, where the program used to run. And when he first met her, he was up here to train our new handler and 2 dogs in 2018. And the whole time, she's just shoving her toy into his hand. And he asked me at that point if I had ever considered training her for the Scat work, and I hadn't. It really hadn't crossed my mind. I was only ever a boat driver for this project and whale behavior archivist. And so I said, yeah, we'll test her. And so he stank up her rope by rubbing it in his armpits and then chucked it into waist-high grass. And before I even knew what happened, she was gone and back again with the rope. And he was like, oh yeah, you could, she's got what it takes, which is high play drive. That's what we're looking for in our dogs. Not food motivated, but high play drive. So the next year, 2019 happened. We had 0 funding for the program, none. And so our handler and dog went on another study, and I scrambled. I was with the governor's task force as well on 2 of the work groups, and got to talking to a woman that was working for the Vulcan Foundation, which was a philanthropic organization that was Paul Allen's. And I pitched my sob story to her, and she secured 2 years of funding for us really quickly, which was amazing. But we didn't have a handler and we didn't have a dog. And so I called Sam and just said, hey, what do you think of this crazy idea about me training Eva? And he said, yeah, go ahead, don't get your hopes up. It's not often the case that companion animals make good scent dogs, but give it a try. And so 2 other handlers from Conservation Canines came up. We spent 4 days on land, mostly training me and Jim how to read her. She knew right away what to do. She knew right away how to find what she was looking for. We went out 2 days on the water. First day, July 5th of 2019. We used that fluke follow method to make sure that we were not going to miss any samples. We found 3 that day with her on the bow. Every time we let her play, she thought she was doing a fabulous job, which was good reinforcement. The next day, July 6th of 2019, she found her first sample all on her own, after the whales had passed by about 25 minutes prior. And it was just stuck in this really beautiful little eddy right by Pile Point, and really beautiful, fatty, rich sample. And she took us right to it. So yeah, we've been pretty lucky with that. 8 now, which is the age that Tucker, our very first dog, was when he first started the program. And she's in her 5th year now. So she has a couple more years, but we are starting to think about the next Scat dog. This gentleman, and then you, Kelly.
Jeff was telling us yesterday that the southern residents have kind of changed their pattern to spend a lot more time offshore at different times of the year. How difficult has that been for your work, that they're moving and they're not as prevalent as they have been in years past?
Well, it's hard for our work because we have long periods of time when we're not on the water, which is why funding for humpback whales and Biggs killer whales is definitely in our future, as far as spending time to try and get funding to do that, so that we're using the summer months on the water. Moreover, it's challenging because to think that this is their summer core critical habitat. This is their summer home. This is where throughout history they have come and in the past been able to forage together as a clan, J clan. All pods, J, K, and L pod are part of J clan. It used to be the fact that they could come here, and by July we would have all members of the southern resident killer whales here for large chunks of time. And so it's almost more of what am I trying to say? It's a sad thing to think about from their perspective that they're not here. Our hope is that they're offshore together, mating amongst each other, amongst the pods, between pods, but we can't know that. We do have Canadian colleagues that are, I don't think they've been out there yet this year, but in the past 6 years or so, they've been out at Swiftsure Bank, which is about 20 miles out the mouth of the Strait of Juan de Fuca off of Nia Bay, and they have encountered members of southern residents on a lot of occasions out there. Our new boat is actually very close to being capable of going out there in calm-ish days. It's the open ocean though, so it's a different beast. And when you think about a fecal sample, we can't have really super choppy water or it just eats the sample up. I literally call it poop-eating water. It's my least favorite. Kelly?
So Josh, actually I was going to give you two leading questions and you kind of hit on both, but so in 2007 and 2008 when Tucker and Catherine and Heath and I were doing that original, the real thing about, and this is a dog point that you kind of touched on, Tucker's drive was the ball, the play. I mean that crazy drive, that, if you expand on that, then I'll give you my second one.
Yeah, so some scent detection dog programs rely on dogs that are food motivated, but Sam, who started Conservation Canines, in fact, he was the mastermind behind the use of scent dogs for conservation work back in the 90s. His philosophy was that he never wanted to have a hungry dog. And so we don't look for food-motivated dogs because you have to keep them a little bit hungry or a lot hungry for them to do their work. We look for play-motivated dogs, and they will work for hours without, just with that hope or with that anticipation of getting to play. Tucker was an anomaly also. Tucker and Iba, although they look very, very different, they were similar in that they were also people motivated. Both Tucker and Iba love people. Tucker, not as much as Iba, but these are dogs that essentially the whales have pooping days and non-pooping days. If we're out there for 3.5 hours straight without finding a sample, chances are we're not going to get one that day. Sometimes I'm proven wrong, but generally speaking, if we're not getting one in the first 3.5 hours, assuming we've got good setups and things like that, it means it's a non-pooping day. These dogs, Tucker and Iba, were dogs that could be remotivated just by playing with their people, not with their coveted toy, but just some attention, some, belly scratches and, talking and things like that. Some of our other dogs, which were amazing dogs on land, these are dogs that are herding dogs like healers and things like that. These are dogs that have to be moving on their own. And I personally would never have that kind of dog on the boat again because it's too hard on them. They want to be moving around. They want to be going places, and moving on the boat is not the same as moving on your own feet. And so I've digressed a little bit, but the play motivation is big, but also other aspects of the dog's personality or breed are also, I'm finding, now that I've had this, I started it with the program in 2009. I've had a lot of years working with a lot of different dogs, and so there are other things that go into it, but number one will always be high play drive.
And then the second one that was also really is that, so you were talking about, I remember this anecdotally too, of course, is the change in the amount of time they've spent, resting behavior and social. resting, we've seen that decrease in the percentage of time spent from 30s to 15s to so much smaller. And you alluded to it, but your thoughts on, I mean, that's also not just rest, that's social, that's that gathering.
Absolutely.
That's this.
Right, right. That's the social fabric that, that is being disrupted. It's being, that fabric is being unwoven because they don't have enough to eat. Resting is, by definition, a social behavior with killer whales because they're conscious breathers. They need to be with each other ideally, which is another reason why isolated individual killer whales in captivity is the most heartbreaking thing to think about. So don't think about it right now. But resting is a social behavior. They gain something. They're able to, and I learned this from Lori, wherever you are, having that deep sleep is very important, just like it is for us. And so when they are not able to rest or socialize because they're having to forage so much more, it's changing who they are as individuals, as it would for us if we were having to forage, day and night for tiny little morsels of a piece of bread, sort of thing. So it's just another reason why we really need to be thinking about fisheries management and pushing for a pretty significant overhaul of that entire paradigm.
Do you know, or maybe this is a question for the trainers or Naomi, do any of the captive marine parks do anything with scat? Like, do they ever collect it, or is it just taken into the filter and that's it, or is there anything ever done?
I do believe that it's starting to be done at SeaWorld, where they're capturing the feces and starting to look at it for some things. I can't think of a publication that's come out that's, they're not going to want to look at stress hormones, for example, in their whales, or maybe not even nutrition hormones. One of the things we've learned about Toki's care is that they were gutting her fish. Why on earth would they gut a fish for a killer whale that evolved eating fish? Like, they were taking all the good stuff out. It's interesting. I mean, I would like to see it. I'd like to see a study of captive killer whale feces, but so far I have not personally.
Our youngest attendee has a question.
Oh, yes.
I have two. The first one is, so how long would you say, like, if you didn't stop, like, working, how long would you say it would take you to analyze, like,
Yeah. So, I mean, our new lab, now that the protocols for how to do the analysis have been done and compared to what we were getting from Sam's lab, and they're basically the same. We're getting the same findings. That was a big part of the kind of the slowdown over the last half a year. But in a perfect world, if the funding was there and we had, let's say, 10 scat samples that were collected in January, theoretically we could have that back as early as March or April. So very, very quickly. In a perfect world, it could be faster, but the fact of the matter is that the lab is analyzing fecal samples from tons of other projects. We're just one of their projects. So we kind of get in the queue. I do think that we get a little bit of a bump because it's an interesting study for them too. But it could be done faster, but we don't have the lab. It takes, I can't even imagine how much equipment, how much money it would cost to have all that equipment. So it benefits us financially to partner with a lab that's already doing fecal samples on other species. So very different than at the academic level where it can take 6, 7, 8 years. That's exactly what we do. We look at, we had a slide up there, maybe we went a little bit too fast through it, but we can tell who the individual is. Well, we can tell species because we're behind them. We don't need to know that, but the fecal sample will tell us that it's Orcinus orca. It'll tell us who the individual is. If it's a female, if she's pregnant, not only that, how pregnant, or if she's just lost a pregnancy. All of those come out of different hormones related to different stages of pregnancy. We can tell if they're stressed out. We can tell if they're getting enough food. All of these things we are already doing. And then I want to add all these other things like lipid content and some other things. So great questions. I love your mind.
I just recently became aware in an article about the federal court of Seattle to limit fisheries in Southeast Alaska. And you were quoted in an article about limiting fishery for these whales. I was recently in Southeast Alaska and there's lots of rumblings about this. So I'm just curious to know a little bit more if you could speak to that, when it will go into effect, and like, is there any way to quantify how that victory will supply?
Yeah, I feel like I just have to interrupt you really quickly. That was a short-lived victory. About 3 weeks ago, a special panel of 3 judges, 2 of which were appointed by Trump, decided to rule against that decision to limit the fishing, the troll fishing in the spring and, the summer and winter troll fishery was put on hold until NOAA could go back and do a new biological opinion because the lawsuit filed by the Wild Fish Conservancy, for which I gave a declaration, an expert declaration in support of that lawsuit from Wild Fish against NOAA. It was a done deal. It went through a magistrate judge, looked at both sides of the case. A federal judge looked at the case and ruled that NOAA was in fact negligent in allowing these fisheries to occur, knowing that they were jeopardizing the ability of several runs of listed endangered salmon and the endangered southern residents. And basically NOAA said, we can't come to any other sort, this is prior to the lawsuit, we can't come to the table and come up with a different way of doing this. So we're just gonna go ahead and let Alaska determine the amount of fish that can be caught and how long the fishing will occur. This is literally like letting the fox guard the hen house. NOAA was found to be negligent because of that lawsuit. The federal judge said, we're gonna stop the summer and winter troll fishery. And then this 3-panel judge, just maybe 3 weeks ago, ruled against that and said, we recognize that NOAA actually is in violation of the Endangered Species Act, but we're gonna go ahead and let the fishing happen even though it's illegal until they can figure that out. I mean, literally, that's like, it is allowing an illegal activity against endangered species continue to occur knowingly because of economics. Today, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but today in the New York Times, there's a very, very big article about this issue. I would encourage you to read it. I would encourage you to stay involved in this issue. It is the biggest issue facing the southern resident killer whales. These whales are at the far, far south range of fish-eating killer whales. So they're getting the dregs of what's happening in Alaska. All of the fish from Oregon, Washington, and BC, Canada, all of the anadromous fish, the salmon that exit their natal rivers, exit into the Pacific, go right up into the Gulf of Alaska and spend anywhere from 3 to 5 years there getting big before trying to come back and spawn in their native fishing in their natal river. Yet, up to 97% of those fish are caught in Alaska. They're from down here, they're caught in Alaska, they get stamped with that Alaskan caught Chinook salmon stamp that consumers think is sustainable, sold literally around the world, And up to 97% of that is salmon from down here, and a high percentage of those are runs that are on the endangered species list. And Alaska is allowed to continue to do that. That's where these fish are going. Why fishermen and the fisheries management agencies in Washington State and Oregon are not up in arms more about that so much fish from down here is being caught up there and branded as Alaskan fish, is beyond me. I heard it said about a week ago that an official in Alaska, an official fisheries manager in Alaska said, the rent that Washington and BC fish pay to forage in Alaskan waters is the fact that we get to fish them in waters. Fair Fisheries Campaign, we're updating that on our website right now because this whole thing with the lawsuit was like, oh, great. And then it's like, ugh. So check back to our website to stay up to date on that, but it's a huge issue. If we're wondering why the southern residents aren't getting enough to eat, it's because of the way that the Southeast Alaska fisheries is allowed to run. I think that's it. Okay, thank you so much, so much.